Inside the halls of San Diego State University lies a program dedicated to storytelling and pursuing the truth. Welcome to Where You At, a podcast that takes you inside the work of alumni for the School of Journalism and Media Studies at San Diego State. Our goal is to show the success of our alumni, inspire students with the stories, and connect students and alums on a pathway to journalism success. And now, here's your host, Josh Suchon.
This week on the Where You At podcast, we are on campus. Let's go. We are on campus. I am back on campus and super excited. We are in San Diego State's new podcast room. And this week on the Where You At podcast, we're talking military, veteran affairs reporting, and we're also discussing what it's like when you come back to becoming a student after spending a long time in the military. Our guest is Andrew Dyer. He was enlisted in the Navy for over 10 years, then separated. He worked on 2 different aircraft carriers, went back to school, Southwestern College for 2 years. He was at San Diego State for 2 years. He was the editor-in-chief of the daily Aztec. He now works for KPBS, where he covers military and veteran affairs. Andrew, welcome, and congratulations on being the first person inside the studio.
You know, it's really great to not only get that long, glorifying walk up to my introduction, but also to be in the studio. I feel like we're really breaking new ground on the Where You At podcast today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Shout out to Temple for creating this room that students use and that alums like me can come back and be a part of it. And you know, I know it wasn't too long ago when you finished, class of 2018, but just when you walk back on campus, what kind of emotions does it stir in you when you come back on campus?
I'm glad I don't have to come here every day. And,
okay.
Glad I'm not that I have negative memories of the campus or anything, but you know, it's a real singular it's a singular place. It's a singular moment in your life. And, you know, when you're done, you're done. I really feel that way. It is nice to come back. I enjoy the habit. I like to get a burger and, I like to, you know, the campus is beautiful, of course. And now I work on campus, so I'm here more often than not. But it's great. You know, Trader Joe's wasn't quite open. I think it opened the year that I graduated. So that's a really nice amenity that I wish we had.
I'm blown away every time I come back to this campus. And I think my first thought is, man, these students are so lucky. And then I go, I'm glad they're so lucky. I want the students to be spoiled because it's so cool. All right, let's talk about, you work for KPBS. Give us kind of like the overview in terms of like what stories you work on, what platforms that you decide that these stories are going to go on.
Well, normally a story, we do 2 kinds of stories. So we have daily stories and we have feature stories. Everything is multi-platform, TV, radio, and web story. A feature is about a 4-minute story that is obviously more in depth, whereas a daily is, you know, on TV, it's just over a minute, and on radio, it's about 50 seconds long. So you're much more limited on, you know, how many voices you can get in stories like that. So a daily turn is, you know, you gotta, sometimes you'll go out, you do the reporting, you come back to edit, you write your TV script, you track it, then you got to write your radio script, you track it, and then you write your story for the internet, and you try to get all of that done in one day.
Is it always that order? TV first, radio second, internet third, or does it ever depend?
It does depend. We have the earlier deadline is the TV deadline. So, you know, we go on deadlines. Mm-hmm. And because it's a live broadcast news show every weekday, then, you know, that has to happen.
Yeah.
I have to get that done. Some stories, sometimes I'll write a web story first, like the day before or a couple days before even, if it's complex and I need to get everything out. And then once I write text story, then I can better pick out what I need for a script that's going to have much less. You know, you have all the room you want online, so I can then pick out what I need, like the key points for the broadcast mediums.
I think this is really important for all journalists, especially student journalists, to understand all the different platforms. So when you go out there from a technological standpoint, what cameras are you holding? What microphones are you holding? What pens and notepads? How are you working with all of these different multimedia things to create all of them?
I think everybody has their own method. I've never used a digital recorder. I've always just used my phone. A lot of reporters my age who maybe came up pre-smartphone, I do still see people using digital recorders. I bought one and I never used it.
I still have one.
And that's just, technology changes. But usually I work with a video journalist who shoots the video. For me personally, I do have a Zoom recorder that I mostly use to capture natural sounds. I have a shotgun mic, or sometimes I'll just use the mic on the Zoom, and I'll capture my nats that way. And then the videographer will lav up our interview subjects with a lavalier mic, and I will just pull the audio from the video and use that like on the radio instead of like taking my own audio of them talking. It's just like economics of time, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm getting the video anyway. Let me just pull the audio from that. That's kind of my method. I do still have notebooks. I don't use them as much as I did at the newspaper. Sometimes it's nice just to have it so that you look like you're paying attention to somebody. But I don't. For one, writing on the notebook, the microphones will pick it up. I need the sound a lot of times. So, but like if I'm going into court, of course, like federal courtrooms, you're not allowed to record. Military courtrooms, you're not allowed to record. So, in those instances, it's vital to take handwritten notes. But I do take a lot fewer handwritten notes than I used to.
All right, let's rewind because again, such a unique path. Tell us about just your journey. Why did you decide to go to the Navy, and then the process after 10 years of departing and saying, okay, let's try journalism?
Well, so when I joined, it was, I think I went to the recruiter. It was like 2 weeks after 9/11, and, people were just joining the military, I guess, and I was one of them.
Okay.
I kind of knew I didn't want to, get shot at, and I figured the Navy was a good place to, avoid bullets. This is right when we were going into Afghanistan. Iraq wasn't even like, at that time, the drums of war were not beating for Iraq just yet at that time. That didn't come until 2002. Yeah, so I ended up going to Japan on an aircraft carrier called the Kitty Hawk, and I was ship's company. I was there for 4 years and came back to the States, did a little shore duty in Corpus Christi, Texas. And then my command there got BRACT, which means the base realignment and closure. That's when the Congress like closes a base or whatever. My shore duty got cut short, and I ended up on ship's company again here in San Diego on the Ronald Reagan, and then I got out in 2012.
So when you first initially enlisted, was it just this sense of this happened to our country, and I feel like I want to be a part of it? Or was it that simple, or what are the other different reasonings that went into it?
Well, I'd recently been fired from my job at H-E-B. It's a grocery store, and I didn't want to look for another job. I lived out kind of in the country, and all the jobs were in San Antonio, and like I didn't, it was a real pain to like go and find a job that's just going to pay me minimum wage anyway. I was just tired of it. I was tired of living in the country. I was tired of being poor, and kind of tired of like, I was 21. And I was just tired of like not going anywhere and being, living in a trailer. And I thought the Navy, at least it'll get me to the beach somewhere. So I got out of there as soon as I could.
Okay. So once your time with the Navy is complete, tell us, do they tell you you've got these options, or do you just say, all right, thanks for the time, I'm off to school? Or what was the decision making that leads you to initially start at Southwestern College?
Well, the Navy had its own kind of series of layoffs, coming out of in 2011, there were certain job specialties that were overmanned, right? They had brought too many people in. and there was like a log jam to get promoted. And so they kind of targeted mid-career sailors. And it's just there wasn't a place for me anymore. So when I got out, it was kind of a scramble to find a job. My priority was to stay in San Diego. I really like it here. So I took like the first job offer that came along, which was doing like on-site, I guess they called it a field service engineer. I was going into different hospitals all around and working on equipment. And one thing I found out, like being in the Navy and working on electronics is one thing, because there's a lot of other things that you do, right? You don't just work on electronics. But whenever I was just working on electronics, I was like, man, this really sucks. I did not like it. So I had to find something else to do. Nobody wanted to talk politics on the job, like when you're just turning wrenches and stuff. Nobody wanted to talk about like the implications of like the Sandy Hook shooting and what it means for this and that and policy. Like nobody wanted to have that conversation with me. And so I was, well, what should I do? What am I interested in? And when I got to Southwestern, it didn't take me long to like find the student newspaper and get involved in journalism.
Yeah, journalism. We have to talk about these things, even if they're uncomfortable topics, Sandy Hook and these others. These are important discussions. Was there a moment when you went from, I think I want to do journalism to, yes, this is what I want to do?
So I was kind of, when I started at Southwestern Community College, I was kind of like, had this vague notion that I wanted to be a writer, right? Like, what is that, right? Like, you have like these romantic ideas of what writers are.
Just saying the word. I want to be a writer.
I'm a writer now. Like, I don't know. Anytime you see a writer on TV, like somehow they have money, they have like a sports car or something, and they don't seem to work a lot, right? So I'm like, gosh, man, if I could be a writer. Like, whenever I was taking a creative writing class, my professor she had an MFA and had all this education, and she would talk about how hard it was, being an adjunct professor and making ends meet and driving across all of these community colleges in San Diego County. And I was like, man, being a writer, man, sounds like a tough way to go. But one of my classmates in that creative writing class, we would peer review kind of our own, fiction writing and stuff. And he was like, yeah, you're a pretty good writer. You should come over and check out the newspaper with me. And that's how I kind of figured out, I can write news. And, that's an option. And there's a career path that you set goals for yourself, right? Incremental goals. And whereas becoming a writer, there's not a real you don't know how to just become a writer, but becoming a reporter, a newspaper reporter, like, okay, I know the steps I need to take to get there.
All right. So you go from Southwestern College to San Diego State. And if you don't mind me asking, I'm thinking that most of the students that are around you are between ages 18 and 22, and you're not. You're older at that point. Mm-hmm. Just what's it like as an older student coming back to campus and kind of like blending in and fitting in and still feeling like I'm getting this college experience just in a different way?
Oh, it's great. I mean, I never really there are a lot of older students. There's a lot of veterans who are at both Southwestern and at San Diego State. But I never really gravitated toward like the veteran community of students. Like I think it was because I was in newsrooms and with the student paper that I kind of found a home with those kids. And I call them kids, they're adults, but I never, it was a lot of fun. I was 34 when I went back to school. In my mid-30s, I'm married, I have a kid and stuff, but I always had so much fun with all of my kind of classmates and my colleagues in these student newsrooms. I never felt like I was different or like I didn't fit in. Like, we had a lot of fun together.
That's one of my favorite takeaways from my time at the Daily Aztec was that it didn't matter where you were from. It didn't matter how old you were. It didn't matter like where you came from. Like, we just all bonded, and you would just meet people who you otherwise would never have met. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so cool. Tell us about just what are some of your specific stories that you worked on at the Daily Aztec that either you're most proud of, or maybe they were the most controversial? Like, take us back. You were there from 2016 to 2018. Like, what was happening on campus during that time?
One thing, well, I'll get to the two that stand out to me, and I'll talk about the mascot first. Each year, both the year I was the opinion editor and my EIC year, we had mascot-related events, right? The first year was the Associated Student Resolution, whether to vote to, I can't remember the exact verbiage, but basically to ditch the Aztec moniker and mascot. And then the next year, the faculty senate took up that resolution. And it was incredibly controversial. We got a lot of engagement. At the time, I was, especially my EIC year, I was hyper fixated on analytics, and I used to watch how all our stories did, and I used to, check my Facebook, and I'd pull those numbers and all of that. And mascot stuff really got the most engagement, mostly from alumni who wanted to kind of complain about snowflakes and stuff. They would always be in our comments, so much so that I ended up writing an editorial telling them, hey, this school is for the students. Like, get on with your life, right? But that was always very controversial. There was an adjunct professor here named Ozzy Monge who had written, I think it's a thesis or his master's thesis on the history of the Aztec mascot. It's very kind of thoroughly researched history where, his argument was like this thing started with racism, and it's always been racist, and it's racist to this day. Like, there's a lot of people in the San Diego State world who don't want to hear that and didn't like him making all that noise. So he found himself, under fire. Some, powerful alumni groups and people in the community, really wanted to tear him down. My understanding is that his thesis was subject to like some pretty stringent, review, and people wanted to, find any reason to discredit his research. There was a lot of effort to do that. And what ended up happening was he ended up being the subject of an investigation, a couple of investigations, I believe. One where a white student had tried to help with one of the Native organizations on campus that Monge was like an advisor to. And so like in social justice, there's this concept of like white saviors, of like white people coming into spaces of people of color and then trying to kind of take over, right? And like, hey, we should be doing it this way or this way. And he had made a comment to her to kind of like, sit back and kind of, let the Native students kind of take the lead. And I think there was some Facebook Messenger exchanges where he had said some things that probably crossed a line along these lines, right? Like white savior and stuff. And she complained about racial discrimination. Anyway, this long story is I got a copy of that investigation before it was public. I got an early copy of it. The university will not release things like that, right? It was done by, I think, the Secretary of State's office. And I knew that the Union Tribune also had obtained a copy of this investigation. And so it was like over the holiday break, and it was like January of 2018. And me and my news editor at Daily Aztec, Will Fritz, we're both big losers and hanging out in the newsroom during holiday break when nobody's on campus. And we sat there and we banged out the story. We each wrote part of it, and then we exchanged our drafts and edited each other. And that afternoon we published. And yeah, we scooped the UT. It was always something that, I wanted to do when I was at the DA. Like, I was always fighting for legitimacy and trying to throw our weight around on campus. Like, I had conversations with the athletics department, because, they have broadcast partners. CBS broadcasts the games. And I'm over there saying, hey, you need to let my reporters in there. Like, I always felt like I was fighting somebody. Having that story before it was in the UT was kind of like that was like the best moment. I mean, it's an awful story. I felt for Monge and what he had gone through, and his union. He was not able to comment for the story, so we could only write the story that was in report what was in the findings in the investigation. So it was a tough story, but it was also one where I was really kind of proud of the way that we handled it, professionally, and part of being a professional is understanding, the news environment and, doing the extra work to, it is important to get scoops and to be, on the leading edge of, breaking news. And so we broke news, and that was cool.
This is cool. And I think this is a really great example of student journalism. And I want to get into this. First, I want to slip in about how I'm so glad that digital journalism exists, because I'll never forget when I found out who San Diego State's athletic director was going to be. This is when Fred Miller had retired. And I knew that it was going to be this guy named Rick Bay. But we didn't publish for another 3 weeks. And I was so mad because I knew that I had the story and nobody else did. And I had to wait 3 weeks before this old-fashioned paper would actually come out. And by then they had announced it. So I'm glad that you guys were able to get your scoop. But let me ask you this. When it comes to this type of story, this hot button story, and I can definitely further your point about alums caring. I would say that more so than any, as an alum, if one of my fellow alums sends me an article, it's because the basketball team is winning, the football team is losing, or it's because something about the Aztec name. Like, those are the three things that get my friends sending stories to me. How did you balance? We're going to have opinion stories. We're going to have news stories. We need to make sure that we cover the story properly, journalistically, but yet we try to advance the story in a professional manner in all the different ways.
Well, it's hard, and it's like not hard, right? Because like for me, like I can have two thoughts in my head. I can have my opinion and express my opinion, but I can also produce a balanced news story, right? Like I can do both things, and I feel like I understand where the line is. Now, you can never completely erase bias. I mean, just choosing to cover a story, right? You are biasing that story over another. So there's always bias in the way you select stories and the way you frame stories. That's always there. But that's also like an important part of journalism is people say that they don't have an agenda in journalism, but you kind of should have an agenda in a way. Like your agenda should be to inform people, let them know about threats to democracy or threats to their community. It's not, the world is not that black and white, that view from nowhere, right? There is a perspective, and there is like right and wrong in the world. And it's not, bad to try to be on the right side of that line. But, we tried to, and I tried, when I was the opinion editor, I tried to get, more conservative voices in the paper. I did bring on like a senior staff writer to kind of to do that. And it's, just the conservative kind of voices didn't want to write for the Daily Aztec. There's other publications out there, College Fix, which don't get me started on them. But there are other places that, are looking for the conservative grievance angle from students. And they probably pay better than the student paper, which, is zero. So, I wasn't able to ever really, really get that in there. But I did try. With the mascot, we, you get the voices. You go to the meetings. And when that mascot fight was happening, I was on the opinion desk anyway, so I wasn't that worried about it. But our news desk and our news writers, their job was to get that balance. When I was the opinion editor, like I wanted people with opinions. I don't like the who knows type of like opinion stories. Like, what does this mean? Well, many people say this, others say this. I don't if you're going to write an opinion piece, like have an opinion and be brash about it. I want that kind of opinion writing. So that's what we did.
The other part of the story that I really enjoyed is you talked about how you and Will Fritz teamed up on the story and how you would write part and he would write part and then you would edit each other. And I think that is just the best when you have the confidence and a coworker and a classmate to say, make me better, and vice versa. Tell us more about the collaboration with Will and other students, especially in that story, though.
So as editor-in-chief, you don't get a lot of bylines. You don't write a lot of stories because you're the editor. You have to do everything else at the paper. But that story, it was just he and I in the room, right? He's the news editor. I'm the editor-in-chief. If we're going to write a story, we don't have another editor to then hand it to. So the only way to, fairly produce this story was to kind of edit each other, edit one another, and then put them together and make sure we were kind of covered in that way that, the story had, seen multiple sets of eyes and, had gone through, fact check and all of that to make sure we were, safe. You don't want to just – the worst thing for any reporter is to publish something and to have an error undermine your reporting. Even if your reporting is accurate, any factual error just undermines all of that. So you want to be very careful before you hit the publish button.
Any other memories stand out from your time at San Diego State? We focused a lot on this story in the Daily Aztec, but other classes, even if it's not a journalism class, like what are your other takeaways from going to school here?
I took a lot of great classes. I took I think it was the history of Motown, which I really enjoyed. There's a music or arts credit. I can't remember. An incredible class. A lot of people took it as a blow-off class, and I would get mad because they'd be like talking all class, and I'm like trying to listen. I'm here to learn about the history of Motown. Like, shut up.
I just read a book about the history of Motown. It was incredible. I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. Well, I'm more of a Stax Records person, but that's we did talk a little bit about Stax, so that was good in that class. But there was also a natural disasters class I took, a science class. I think it was under the geology. I can't remember which, but it was natural disasters, and it was incredible. I loved it. So those are like my favorite classes that are at the surface. I'm sure there were more, but those are the ones that jump out to me.
The other thing that you did, and correct me if I'm wrong, you actually started doing this before you came to San Diego State, is that you were covering the industry of craft beer for San Diego City Beat. Tell us how this came about and writing about craft beer.
I was into craft beer. This was 2015, so this was very much like on the crest of like the whole craft beer movement and the revolution. New breweries were opening almost every week, and it was a really exciting time in beer, right? Like it's kind of cringy now to look back on it, but people were really excited, and there was a real audience for news about beer in San Diego. And I was in a Facebook group. This is when Facebook still had some sort of utility for users. I was in a beer group on Facebook, a San Diego beer group, and there was a writer, a freelance writer who had a column at City Beat, and they posted in the Facebook group like, "Hey, I'm leaving my City Beat column. Like, they're going to be looking for new writers. If anybody wants, email me. I'll connect you to the editor." And I was like in that creative writing class at this time, and I was like, "Well, why not? Like, I'll try." Like, I was very anxious, like I putting myself out there, but I did try. I sent in a writing sample, and the editor got back with me, and they brought in 2 freelance writers to cover beer. Myself and another writer named Beth Demon. She actually just wrote a book about cider. She's also kind of taken off on her own career. Her book is the Craft Beer Lover's Guide to Cider. And, she's been like touring with her book and stuff. And so both of us kind of got our start like in professional writing by doing these beer columns for City Beat.
And how much of your beer column would be about, I really like this beer, and how much of it would be covering the industry of what this means financially to the city and just sort of like the changes that are occurring as a result of this?
It really evolved because when I started, I didn't know what I was doing. I knew enough about beer to kind of fake a surface level conversation, but I had no real knowledge of like the brewing process or how the industry functioned or how like the way that like somebody with an education can describe what they're tasting, right? It's got its own language, I was none of those things. So I think my early columns in City Beat, it shut down and the new owners took all the website off the air. So my articles are no longer findable online, which I think is a little bit of a blessing because I was learning how to do it. And then as I got, into journalism and the student paper, that education and that work began to reflect in my columns on City View, and they became much more of a newsy type of a column over time.
Let's talk about transitioning from college to your first jobs after college. You were at Voice of San Diego. You were at San Diego Union Tribune. Tell us about the process of finding out about the jobs, applying for the jobs, and ultimately getting them.
Well, that's like the most stressful part of graduating with a journalism degree is there's a lot of journalism graduates and there's not a lot of journalism jobs. Even I mean, now, coming off this round of layoffs at so many outlets, it seems particularly bleak now. But it was it was bleak in 2018 also, right? And it's really scary. And I was terrified. You can't help but kind of compare yourself to your cohorts at other schools. I'm following the EICs at other college papers around the country and watching them get, New York Times internships and you just can't help but wonder how come I didn't even make it through the first round. Of course, now looking back, there's a lot of, especially New York Times, where they take from there's only a handful of schools that they pluck their people out of, which is its own thing. But you just can't let that, get to you, right? Because I've always felt like if you do the work, then you'll be able to get where you want to go. And it's all about just doing the work. And in college, I really prioritized the Daily Aztec and the student newspaper more so than my journalism classes, which I know were in the JMS. But that was my approach, was I'm going to do journalism and not worry about my journalism class grades and let the journalism that I do and publish be my resume, when I'm trying to get jobs and internships. It was really scary. We have an internship coordinator at JMS. I'm sure students already are well aware. It was somebody different back then, but I did everything that I was asked of me. There was I don't know if they still have it, but there was a capstone class your last semester in JMS where it was all about, putting together your resume and doing I can't remember everything we did. I remember doing a vision board.
You didn't save your vision board?
No, I don't think so. I remember I had the UT on my vision board though, ironically. And but it was all about transition. The class was focused on transition, and I just did everything that was asked of me. And I applied for a bunch of internships. Was lucky enough to have kind of multiple offers coming out of school. And when Voice of San Diego reached out to me to offer me an internship there, I was in Houston at the Houston Chronicle, going through the process for a fellowship with Hearst. And then, I ended up getting both things offered, and I ended up not going with Hearst. I was very lucky to have a job offer to where I could actually turn down a fellowship that was extremely competitive, and they weren't very happy with me. But hey, the UT, I was a month into my internship at Voice when the UT offered me a job. So, I mean, it's a full-time job. It's not a fellowship. It's not an internship. It's a job. I'm taking it. I've been lucky that at the time, and I don't know, the UT's changed a lot since 2018, but at the time, they took interns every spring semester from JMS. There was a group of, I want to say 5 JMS students that would just intern at the UT in the spring. I was one of them my senior year, working on the Watchdog team, which is the investigative team, and working with that editor. When the military position came open, he was like, "Oh, I had this intern that was actually a veteran." I hadn't even considered covering the military as a beat. I was more interested in investigative and political stuff, but like I said, it's a job.
Yeah. So once you start covering the military, give us the pros and the cons. You are a veteran. You have knowledge that I would not have, that most people would not have. Tell us what it's like covering the military.
It's frustrating. It's a frustrating beat because it's really difficult to get access, right? Like you can't just go and hang out on base and just talk to people off the street, right? You're going to get thrown off the base. You have security called on you. You can't just walk onto a ship and walk around and go down into engineering and ask, "Hey, is your chief abusive? Like, is somebody threatening you? Are there a bunch of sexual assaults down here?" You can't just do that. Like, it's incredibly challenging. So you have to learn how to kind of be patient. You file freedom of information requests for anything you want, right? Like you're constantly, I'm trying to, pry records from the military. You're talking to people. You're getting to know like how the organization functions, right? You need to understand like if something happens on this ship, okay, well that ship is. I need to talk to Air Forces for something on that ship, or I need to talk to Third Fleet, or I need to talk to Surface Forces, right? Like every ship might have a different person that you need to talk to, and it's not somebody on the ship; it's somebody at a command somewhere. So, learning the organization was kind of even as like a veteran, like I didn't have any concept of that stuff when I was in. Like I was just a guy, but. It's really interesting because like so much stuff happens on that beat. And it's very undercovered. There's not a lot of full-time reporters covering the military. There's so few of them that, like we all kind of know each other or know of each other across the country. Like the guy that covers the military for like the New York Times and the Washington Post, like they all know who I am and I know who they are, right? Like just because there's like it's like a dozen of around the country that do this full time. So even in San Diego, there were two. There was the UT and KPBS, and now it's just me at KPBS. The UT has somebody that does military stories, but it's not a full-time beat anymore. It's undercovered, and it's super important because, I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked at the budget of the U.S. government, but about half of it goes toward the military. So there's a lot of public funds, funding this organization, and somebody's got to watch how they're doing it.
Has there ever been a time when someone kind of leans into you and says like, "Come on, you were one of us, Andrew. You were one of us. You don't need to write about that," or just tries to move your coverage this way or not, kind of leans on the fact that you need to protect us because you were one of us?
No, I don't I haven't really run into that at all. Now there might be a little bit of like, there is some coziness and friendliness, I think, especially like maybe the folks that are in the Pentagon every day, they have different relationships with the senior leadership than I do because I'm out here and I don't work in the same building as them. But for the most part, I deal a lot with the public affairs officers at the military, and a lot of them go through school, JMS, because we have the master's program. So not only do I have like a military connection with them, but a lot of them go through San Diego State. So like I've never run into somebody in the public affairs shop that, like they might try to tell me like this isn't really news or this isn't much of a story. And I'm like, actually it is. But
let me decide that.
Yeah. That's about as far as it goes.
Okay.
But for the most part, they're very professional and they want to give you information, but they have a boss, right? They all work for an admiral. And, they can only give me what the admiral lets them give me for the most part. So it's not even their fault whenever they can't say more than they say. But, if you just treat people with respect and with professionalism, like sometimes maybe you just get a phone call on a Sunday night from somebody who says, "Listen, I've got something for you." And you didn't hear it from me, but
those are my favorite phone calls.
You
didn't hear it from me, but
some reporter from some other outlet reached out to me about this, and I don't trust them. So I'm going to give it to you because I trust you.
Yeah.
That's on them. Like if they can live with themselves doing that kind of thing. That's fine. That's, as a reporter, like I have no ethical issue with them finding out that another outlet is doing a story and then deciding to give it to me. Like I've earned that trust. I've built that relationship with that person. So a lot of it is just like being like a normal person and being cool with people and like understanding. And maybe I hold off on publishing a story for a couple days because if it's not timely, right? Like I don't have to publish an investigation about something that happened years ago on Monday. It can be Wednesday if person has a good reason to say, hey, can you give me a little bit of time to get you this response? I got it. That's fine, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and just by being like reasonable and normal and just being cool with people, like, you know, eventually like it might pay off for, you know, down the road. You never know. And I found that, you know, just being, you know, reasonable with everybody seems to work out fine, even if I'm, you know, writing stories that are embarrassing to the Navy at times. Like, it's fine. Nobody really holds it against me. It's my job, and I think they understand that.
Okay, we're going to start to wrap things up, but on the website for you with your bio, there's 3 stories that are emphasized. I want you to pick one of these 3, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, and then we'll wrap things up. Got the story about the Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher. There was the fire on the USS Bonham Richard, and the rise in local extremist movements. Mm-hmm. Pick one of those, and let's talk a little bit more, sink our teeth into that topic before we wrap things up.
Sure. And that's a great callback and segue, because I mentioned there were 2 stories from my time here that really stood out to me. One was, of course, all the mascot controversies. But the second one was the kind of rise of a little-known guy who was a student here in 2016. His name is Patrick Casey. Patrick Casey is the founder of a white supremacist group called Identity Europa, now defunct. One of the organizers of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville in 2017 was a San Diego State student. And our news editor at the time wrote a story about this person because these flyers had started showing up on campus from this Identity Europa group, right? And it was kind of the early stages of like the alt-right is kind of what people were calling it then. But it was very obvious to me that this was like a neo-Nazi, white supremacist kind of organization cloaking itself in something else, which sometimes it's called like civic nationalism, this idea that your white nationalist movement is somehow a little more palatable to mainstream people if you can kind of just, you know, not, they call it their power level, right? You don't want to reveal like how much of a white supremacist you are to normal people. Anyway, Patrick Casey, you know, coming out of San Diego State, and, you know, eventually starting another group and then Unite the Right. And he's still in the supremacist sphere. I think he's been allowed back on Twitter or X. He had been banned years ago, but that issue with the flyers and stuff, eventually a journalism collective called Unicorn Riot obtained and released a bunch of Discord chat logs from these groups. And this is when I was at the UT, and there was a lot of stuff in there from, you know, that back then and stuff about San Diego State. So I went through and I found out all the stuff, the local colleges that these people were doing. It's just a handful of jerks, and they're putting up flyers to make people mad. And, but whenever the uprisings in 2020 affiliated with the Black Lives Matter movement, specifically in La Mesa, you know, I was in La Mesa whenever everything went down. I was there that night, and you know, it was very harrowing. You know, I was shot with pepper balls from the cops, and you know, I have a gas mask, but I was tear gassed and all of that. But coming out of that was what I thought was really dangerous, was these kind of self-appointed neighborhood watch posses that rose up in East County, a couple of groups. And, you know, I just got into their Facebook group, and, you know.
Did you tell them that you're a reporter right away, or do you just kind of?
I mean, my Facebook bio has, you know, journalist on it. Yeah. But, I mean, at the time, early on at least, you know, they're not really vetting people. They're just letting everybody in. And so I got in very early, and I never talked with anybody. I just sat there and watched everything they talked about, and, you know, took screenshots and kind of paid attention to it. Yeah, that ended up being wild, because the guy that founded that group ended up at January 6th. And like all of this stuff just kind of eventually came to a head. But there aren't enough people watching those people, right? Like, and people in the community, like I went to Santee to there was like a food drive, and it was I can't remember the group's name, but it was a lot of, Black people in Santee, and they're doing a food drive. And these freaking, this group of, I can't say they're white supremacists because I don't know each one of their individual thoughts and feelings, right? But they would just show up like with these big knives on their belts because it's legal to open carry a knife in California. They can't carry guns. So they show up with knives and they're just there kind of intimidating them. And I'm like, what is going on? And I start talking to them. And it's like, yeah, these people show up everywhere we go. They're always following us. If they do a march, they wait along the path of the march for us. And like, nobody's listening to this community. They're talking about the threats that they're getting from these people. And these people are posting up in front of, stores, like they're going to prevent, looting or something. And it became this thing where like, initially I think there was a big surge of people who would join that group, but then it fell off and it became just this kind of core group of extremists in that group. Eventually, like I just, had enough reporting and enough people in that group. There were, political leaders in that group, mayor of this town or that town and city council member. There are all these, public figures in that group, and they're posting like QAnon, borderline child pornography in there, talking about pedophiles and making all of these racial jokes and, talking about running over protesters. Really violent language. There was a guy in there showing pictures of his short-barreled AR-15s. He ended up getting arrested and charged. He went to prison because of his short-barreled rifles. He was also talking with a sheriff's deputy in Georgia who was bragging about trying to charge Black people with felonies so they wouldn't be able to vote. That was the Shadow Moses thing. But this guy, that Shadow Moses thing and that sheriff's deputy, they got busted because this guy was posting pictures of his illegal guns in this Facebook group. And somebody reported him to the FBI. And it unveiled, people there were at the time. I felt it was really important to be watching this stuff, and so I wrote that story in the UT about the group. It was kind of controversial because a lot of people thought that, hey, these people are just the neighborhood watch. They're trying to keep the community safe, and I'm like, well, that's what they say, but look at what they do and look at what they talk about in their group. So eventually, after the election and all of that, Facebook shut their group down. They took down people's accounts. It became a whole thing. But a lot of these people, even today in 2024, like they still show up in reporting. Now these people are the ones showing up at school boards complaining about trans kids, right? Like, when Santee had its issue, the YMCA thing last year with the trans woman in the locker room, like who's showing up at the YMCA? Oh, it's my old friends from like Defend East County and stuff. It's the same people, showing up. Now they're mad about trans people, right? Like it just kind of, and the thing about tracking extremism, and especially in San Diego, is there's nobody that kind of does it full time. There's not an extremism beat in San Diego. There are extremism reporters who live here, who one of them works for like a national outlet, and but there's not a lot of scrutiny on this movement in San Diego. So I kind of took that upon myself at the UT and kind of continued to watch it. And, more recently, I got this Navy SEAL who's part of this, anti-trans movement at school boards. And last month I got into a Telegram channel that he was in, and he's posting voice memos, and he drops like the Proud Boys slogan in this voice channel. I'm like, oh, and I've got him on tape using a Proud Boys slogan, and I know that the Navy has just cleared him of being affiliated with an extremist group. So patience and perseverance, and knowing who to pay attention to, and like kind of waiting till they will tell on themselves eventually. They always kind of do. So I don't know where this question started and I've been going on, but
they will always tell on themselves eventually, I think, is one of the key phrases in there. And along with patience and perseverance. And also, I think the other lessons here is just having your eyes open and just thinking and keeping track of things. I think that your story is just such a great example of what it means to be a journalist. And you may not get the story today, next week, next month, but the story might keep coming back over and over again in different parts of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's this year especially. We're in an election year. The rhetoric coming from the far right, they're pretty open about not being too concerned about democracy, and there's talking about rounding people up and doing mass deportations and all of this type of language. Things have just continued to go down a pretty dark path, and I don't think it's violation of any journalistic principle or ideas of bias to say that's bad. It is, and it's January 6th was bad, and what it represents is an attempt to overturn an election, and we haven't dealt with that threat, and we've allowed it to simmer and metastasize, and we're staring ahead at an election where I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm concerned. A lot of the people who cover this movement are concerned. It's, I think, the most important part of journalism and the role of journalists is to recognize these things for what they are and these threats, and not be afraid to frame our reporting on this with those stakes in mind versus just kind of like the horse race political, who's winning ahead in the polls, blah, blah, blah. But the stakes of the election are also very important, especially because we haven't really dealt with, what happened with the last one.
Such an interesting conversation, and we could keep going on, and we might once we finish. But there's a couple of things I want to get to before we wrap up. Number one, if you don't mind, I want you to reflect on that kid from this small town in Texas who didn't have a job and was just tired of your life at the time, and the combination of the Navy and Southwestern College and San Diego State and journalism and where your life is now.
I kind of thought that I would eventually figure things out. I didn't always have the best, didn't have the best childhood, didn't come from the best circumstances, but I never thought that I was my circumstances. I always kind of felt like eventually I would figure things out and get to where I wanted to be, even if I didn't know where that was. So, I'm grateful for, whatever the experiences I had leading up to this, but journalism, and especially journalism today, you really do have to kind of be a little bit religious about it, because you're not going to make a whole lot of money. It can be very challenging. It can be a struggle. And you really kind of have to have this kind of religious conviction about the importance of the work to kind of put up with. I mean, it's brutal. All of these journalists were just recently laid off in the last month from a lot of digital outlets. People who are incredible journalists who I've looked up to, and no matter how good you are at the job, you could be on the wrong end of a layoff. And people at the LA Times, they let go of some incredible, incredible people. And it's just so unfair, and it's so brutal. And it's just part of this industry right now. And you have to go in with your eyes open that you might be jumping into a buzzsaw. But the work is vital. It's super important. And as long as you kind of understand that and can balance that and be aware of what you're getting into, it can be incredibly rewarding.
All right. What we like to do at the end is brag about other San Diego State alums who have made us proud. I'm going to go first this week because I want to follow up on what you just said. There's two people I want to brag about. Both of them worked with me at the Daily Aztec. The first, his name is Thomas Newman. And speaking of getting laid off, Thomas is an incredible editor and writer. And it seems like everywhere he goes, through no fault of his own, he gets laid off. He was at the San Diego Union Tribune for a while. He was at ESPN.com. He did some fabulous stuff at ESPN.com. He was at USA Today. He got laid off at ESPN.com. He's now at Sports Illustrated. He's actually one of those who has survived the cuts at Sports Illustrated, at least for now. And I'm super proud of Thomas just for how he continuously gets knocked down and continuously gets back up because he's so talented. And so shout out to Thomas. And the other one I wanted to highlight, because you were an opinion editor when I was the editor-in-chief, Jennifer Stone was the opinion editor. She remains an extremely good friend of mine. While I'm in town, I'm going to see her and her husband and a bunch of other old Daily Aztec friends. She is now a lawyer for the county, and she decided to not pursue journalism and become a lawyer. And to this day, we'll send each other notes about, hey, apparently Merriam-Webster dictionary says that you can end a sentence in a preposition, and we'll go back and forth in text messaging for 5 minutes about how you can end a sentence with a preposition apparently now. Anyways, I'm just super proud to know Thomas and Jennifer. They were great colleagues at the Daily Aztec, and I'm just proud of what they've done with their lives and their careers. Who do you want to emphasize?
I will talk about my my old news editor, Will Fritz. He also followed me as EIC, who's EIC the next year. He's working as an investigative journalist at a nonprofit, and he's got a national beat. He's probably, I'm not going too far out on a limb saying that he was like the best student journalist I ever came across, because he was a student, but like it was like he was like a professional, like from the start. I mean, he just worked his butt off for that paper, and I'm always I'm always rooting for him. He should be at the New York Times by now, in my opinion. And he's who I would recognize.
All right, Andrew. Thank you so much for your time, all of your stories, coming here on campus. This was fun. Hopefully everything recorded properly. Once again, thank you so much for joining us on the Where You At podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I won't be ending any sentences with prepositions in my writing. Just going forward.
I might do that. Once again, that was Andrew Dyer. My name is Josh Suchon. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of the Where You At podcast from campus. We will talk to you again next week.
Thanks for listening to the Where You At podcast. This is Devin Watley from the class of 2021. Thanks to Martine Marine for creating the music you're hearing right now, and Alex Piscatelli for her work on the podcast name and artwork on social media. And a reminder to SDSU alums, we really want to know where you're at. Tell us about your career. Get involved in the school. There's many ways you can do this, from donating your time or money, mentoring students, to even speaking in classrooms, in person or on Zoom. Your work can help us grow the program and create more opportunities for our students to succeed. Again, thanks for listening. Subscribe to this podcast. Tell your friends. Recommend us a future guest. And go Aztecs.